Let's take a look at the second step. The second step requires of us that we reach a belief. Only a belief. That's all it is. And yet it's a major leap. Because for some of us, because we may be coming from a place of absolutely stagnant religious or spiritual beliefs. Maybe we are actively agnostic or actively atheistic. Most people are not. Most people may talk about it, but they're really afraid of God. Remember that as a sponsor, please, because they know they've done a lot of things. They're afraid of being punished and so forth. They don't want it having to do with God because they're afraid of what He's going to do to them. And we have to find a way to get past that. Now, the big book is going to show us the way, and it starts out with these two propositions. First, that the only requirement here is that you be willing to adopt your own conception of God, whatever that may be. It doesn't have to be anything profound at all. It may be that your conception of God is in the trees and the forest and the animals and nature. It may be your conception of God is something totally off the wall that nobody else ever thought of. It doesn't matter. Because what we're doing here is we're addressing ourselves to a power greater than ourselves. So we need to be willing to choose a higher power of our own understanding, whatever that may be. And the other requirement is that we must be willing to accept the proposition that there just might be a higher power, a God out there. A willingness to accept the concept or the existence of a higher power. That's all it takes. Those two things. So we're going to ask for a willingness to believe, and we're going to adopt our own conception of God. And then the big book in chapter 4 gives us much material, the chapter 2 agnostics. It also, in chapter 3, gives us the answers to this question. We're asked to come to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. Well, now, it may well be that we have a whole lot of difficulty in accepting the fact that we're nuts, that we are, in fact, insane. Well, the big book answers that. In the last half of the third chapter, gives us the stories of Jim and Fred and the jaywalker, which clearly illustrate the insanity of taking that first drink, in spite of knowing what's bound to happen. We've got such tremendous background and all. We know what's going to happen, but we do it anyway. We know that if we don't stop, we're going to die, but we do it anyway. And we've made 1,000 commitments not to drink, and yet we can't stop ourselves. And so the big book examines this question of insanity, and it also examines this question of the agnostic and the existence of God. I should tell you that the first 3 steps are gifts. They cannot be forced on anybody. I can't make, and you can't make, anybody you sponsor or anybody you're interested in. You can't make them believe. But the belief will come. If they're doing the work, it will come. Guaranteed. Now, in the big book, we have, on page 53, we've got a little paragraph, which is the second step. It's very simple. It says, we have reached a self-imposed crisis. And in this self-imposed crisis, we've had to come to an understanding that God either is or He is not. God either is everything or He's nothing. Now, the question is very simple. Do you believe that God is a God of your understanding? No definition needed. Not the God of AA, a God of your understanding. Do you believe that that God exists? If the answer is yes, the next question is, do you believe that God is everything, or do you believe that God is nothing? Because you can't have it both ways. God either is or He's not. God's either everything or He's nothing. If the answer is God is and God is everything, then it's simple, isn't it? Because the next question you ask is this. If God is and God is everything, do you have any doubt that He can or has the power to restore you to sanity? And the answer to that has got to be yes. Logically, it must be yes, mustn't it? And so there's the second step. It's that simple. Now the third step begins in the fourth chapter. In the fourth chapter, where in the end of the fourth chapter, there's a segue into the third step, because the big book begins to talk in these terms. For example, it tells us that there's going to have to be a willingness to make leaps of faith. It tells us that the bridge of reason will only carry us so far, that there's a new land of faith out here, and the people are standing there waiting for us, and we want to go to the new land. But the bridge of reason doesn't extend to the new land of faith, the only answer being that we must be willing to take a leap of faith, and when we do that, there are friendly hands there to catch us, and we will find that we have reached the new land, and we have reached the land of faith. And then when we get into chapter 5, we're going to find much further discussion of the third step. And remember, the third step is a decision. So we have conceded our alcoholism. We have come to believe that God can restore us to sanity. And now we're going to make a decision to turn our life and our will over to Him. Now, why would we do that? What would motivate us to go that far? We have never done this in our lives. We have always tried to run our own lives. We have been afraid not to run our own lives. And then we get into chapter 5 and we get to the third step and we begin to understand. And it's this point in the big book where the business of unmanageability comes flooding in. Because we learn here that we've been trying to run our lives based on self-will. We've been trying to arrange everything to suit ourselves. It didn't work. Never worked. It was never satisfactory. The fact of the matter was that we wanted to blame everybody else for the failures. It was not our fault, it was their fault. We ran to psychiatrists, we ran to doctors, we ran to preachers, and why is everybody against me? Why won't anybody do what they're supposed to do? And on and on. In the meantime, we're killing ourselves with booze. The big book says, look, it's time to understand something. Let's get it straight right now. Your problems are your own making. They arise out of yourself. An alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he or she usually doesn't think so. Above everything, it tells us we have to be rid of this selfishness. We have to, or it kills us. Well, now we begin to understand what we began to see back in the first step. That we had no way to defeat alcoholism on our own because we're powerless over it. We were going to have a higher power stand between us and the booze. Now that's not going to happen with a head full of self. And so therefore, if we remain in this mode of selfishness and self-centeredness, it's going to kill us because there's no way for God to come in. There's no way for us to make a surrender when we keep insisting that we're going to play God. And the big book makes it quite clear. We have to be rid of this selfishness or it kills us, and we cannot do this ourselves, but God can and will if we seek Him. And it's at that point, this is where the third step comes in on page 62. It says we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Therefore, we decided, there's the decision of the third step. We decided that hereafter, in this drama of life, God was going to be the director. He would be the principal and we the agent. He the father and we the child, you see. So this is the decision of the third step. And that decision again is going to come to us because we've been doing the reading, going to meetings, we've been talking to people, and we have been praying, and we've been immersing ourselves in this so that suddenly we realize, we have to come to realize that everything I've been doing up to now didn't work. If I wish to live, I'm going to have to do whatever it takes to let God in. We find out that we must make a commitment from here on to work the rest of the steps. That from now on, whether we get the steps or we don't is going to depend upon the work we do and are willing to do. We find out that we must be willing, without reservation, to say, God, here I am, use me. I offer myself to Thee to do with me and to build with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Amen. A powerful prayer. Think of what it's saying. No reservations here. We're saying, here I am, use me in any way that you see fit. And I am making that commitment right now to be free of the things in myself that will stop you from being able to use me. And that means the things that block me off from you. That's the third step prayer. You see, it is the way we implement the decision of the third step. Now, this prayer having been used and the decision having been made, we go immediately to our fourth step. The fourth step is broken down into 4 parts. The four parts are as follows. The first part is a resentment list. This means that we're going to identify everybody for whom we have a resentment. And we're going to make a list of the things which they did, which have caused us to be angry and resentful toward them. Before we pass on to the second part, we're going to be freed from our resentments. That may sound strange to you if you haven't heard it before. In the fourth step, we find the complete spiritual answer to resentments. We're going to pray for the people we resent, and we're going to ask God for the willingness to forgive the things they've done which harmed us. The second part of the fourth step is a list of our own wrongs. Now, this second part of the fourth step is done without reference to the harm that was done by those we resented. We are not going to compare their fault with our fault. We are looking at resentments the same as we would look at termites in our basement. Most of them you can't see, but they're eating your house down, and one of these days you're going to fall through the floor. We cannot afford to let resentment stay because they kill us. And so the second part of the fourth step is designed for us to review our own faults. We look there at our dishonesty and our selfishness and our fear. Okay, now we have completed the cycle of our defects of character. Here is the problem that so many people have these days. Because if you read the 12 and 12, you've got all this phony baloney stuff about 7 deadly sins, for example. Please stay away from that. We don't deal with sin here. Those sins primarily refer to things that we do or did. They do not refer to defects of character. They are not descriptive of what we need to find, and furthermore, they are part of a religious practice which AA is not. There are 4 cardinal defects, all identified in the fourth step. It's very simple. Resentments, dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. And the parts of the fourth step are designed for us to uncover these 4 defects of character. It is in the writing of the fourth step that we find our resentments, we find our selfishness, we find our dishonesty, and we find our fears. And we're going to find as we do that all of these defects are fear-driven. All of them. We're going to find that fear is our only enemy. That it is fear and fear alone which has warped and perverted our natural instincts. It is our natural instincts perverted by fear which we now call defects of character. What are those instincts? For sex, for security, for society. These are natural, they are God-given, they are meant for our good and the good of the race, the human race. But when they no longer function as God intended, they turn against us. And they become a species of insanity, and our minds don't work right. Now, why is it that we can't just talk ourselves out of these things? Well, you can't work on a defect which is a subliminal thing which operates below the level of conscious thought, and that's what these natural instincts are. That's why they're so deadly. We're not consciously able to control these warped defects, these warped instincts. Therefore, we must have God's help. Now, the Big Book makes it clear, if you care to read it. Our selfishness, we can't be free of ourselves, but with God's help we can. Our resentments, Big Book says we can't wish them away any more than alcohol. Our fears, we must have God's help to be freed from fear. Our dishonesty is a function of fear. We're not dishonest unless we're afraid of the results of being honest. It's in every instance, these four defects are not amenable to our own willpower or our own self-correction. We must have God's help. That's what we're doing here in the fourth step, to find out what it is that's eating us alive, that's killing us, that's a cancer, that's ruining our lives, has caused our failures in life, and that we cannot be free of ourselves. Now you see that there's a much broader scope to powerlessness than powerlessness over alcohol, because it is also powerlessness over our thinking. It's powerlessness over over these defects. It's powerlessness over these warped instincts. And we have to have God's help with this. And in the fourth step, we're going to find out what all of this warping has done. What are these defects which are the result of fear? So in our second part of our fourth step, when we examine what we have done to harm others, when we examine our dishonesty and our selfishness and our fear, and we're going to write about this, these defects will just pop right out, like widescreen Technicolor stereophonic. They'll be Dolby, they'll be everything, they'll be right there, we can see them. And we can also see that we are in fact powerless over these things. And we haven't done anything to compare ourselves over here with what they did to us. We're already free of those resentments. We've had the spiritual solution. We've prayed for them. We've asked for the willingness to forgive what they did to us, and it was given to us. So now in the second part, we're going to identify the other three cardinal defects: dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. Then we move on to the third part of the fourth step, which is our fears list. In our fears list, we're going to catalog and list each and every one of our fears. And we're going to list what we believe and what we see to be the cause of those fears. What it is, what was the threat. And there are standard fears that everybody has. And our sponsor will know, and if you're sponsoring people, you need to know what those are. It's going to start right out with losing what we have. Almost everybody has that fear when they come in the door. Not getting what we want or need. Rejection, failure. These are very common. Getting old. Being found out for the things we've done to get what we have. Being punished. God's punishment. Fear of death, fear of injury, sickness, and pain. Fear of drinking and drugging again. And what we do when we write our fears list, we write all these down, and any others that we have, and we write down what we believe to be the cause, what was the threat. And now here's something which is almost, doesn't seem to be anybody understands this, but the fourth step contains, along with the fifth step, a complete spiritual remedy for fear. First, fear that is recognized by us and written down, and then discussed with another person, and then turned over to God, equals no fear. And we'll find that this is the formula which is provided for us. In our fourth step, we're going to write down our fears and what caused them. We want to talk them over with our sponsor, and we want to ask God to remove them. And we want to ask Him to show us what He would have us be. And the big book tells us the truth. It says that at once we will commence to outgrow fear. That's true. And when we get to our fifth step, we will discuss these fears again with our sponsor or whoever's here in our fifth step. And what's the big book say? Our fears fall from us. They're gone. Now, this means the fears we came in with, and anything that we kind of generated up to this point. What did we learn? We learned that every time a fear arises, we recognize it, write it down, talk to somebody about it, and ask God to take it. Why would we then wish to ever live in fear? Fear is very, very toxic. It's very dangerous to us. It's very communicable. It's very painful. It is our enemy. Franklin Roosevelt said the only thing we had to fear was fear itself. And he was right. If there is a devil, his name is fear. And yet we have a way in our big book, our manual here, to be absolutely free of fear if we wish to use the tools that we've been given. And that's found right here in the fourth step. And then finally, the fourth part of the fourth step is a sex inventory. And as most of us know by this time, sex problems, relationship problems, probably cause more trouble in recovery than anything else. Because we're such damn fools about it. And we're so willful about it. And we find somebody that we're attracted to, and we'll run around telling everybody that it must be God's will that we're together. Truth of the matter is, we don't want to find out whether this was a relationship made in heaven or not, because we're afraid it isn't. And we're afraid to ask God to tell us. But the big book says we're supposed to do that, doesn't it? It says if we have any doubts about this in our morning meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. And then it says, and here's the rub, the right answer will come if you want it. Now, the question here is, do you want the answer, right? Because we're so bloody willful about that. And the big book recognizes that we're dealing with the most powerful of all of the three natural instincts. It calls it the imperious urge. The fourth step requires of us, is what part of the directions, that we go to God and we ask for His help to mold an ideal for our future relationship or sex life. Not the ideal person we want in our lives, but our ideal about ourselves, how we are to conduct ourselves, what should be our actions and our motives and our attitudes. And we ask God for help with this, and it's a real good idea to write that down, and write it down in the form of a prayer, and we ask God to help us with that. And then the big book goes on to say a little later, if we fall short of that ideal, we very easily could drink, but not if we're sincerely sorry for what we've done and are willing to let God take us on to better things, in which case the big book says we will be forgiven. And that sets the stage for something later on in the 11th step where forgiveness again becomes an issue. Now, when we have written our fourth step in the four parts, we have two more things that need to be accomplished. One is that we need to have now a list of all the people we've harmed and become willing to make amends to them right now. You say, well, wait a minute. That's the 8th step. That's true. But most of the 8th step is done in the 4th step. So now you can see that to have a 5th step, we're going to first have to have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 4 is going to need to be done right. Otherwise, when we come out of 4, we don't have all the facts. The 4th step is not designed to make us wrong or bad or indict us. It's to teach us. We do the 4th step to find out what's wrong with us that we can't fix ourselves. Now, the fifth step is not an optional step. It is an absolutely critical step. It is utterly necessary that we work our fifth step. The Big Book says this, that we must be entirely honest with somebody if we are to live long and happily in this world. Now, the fifth step is designed to accomplish a number of wonderful things. And as a matter of fact, for a lot of people, the fifth step will be a very big head start on our spiritual awakening. All the way back in the fifth step. We are going to feel that we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. We're going to feel that the drink problem is going away. Our fears will fall from us. And the fifth step is to be done withholding nothing. And there's only one sentence which defines the fifth step in the Big Book. You know that? It's really, the Big Book is so dense. And what it tells us is this. It says that we pocket our pride and go to it. We pocket our pride, put our pride aside. Remember, pride, the godfather of all of our defects. Fear, the hitman that pride sends forth to kill us. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. That's the fifth step. The result of this is a wonderful thing, because the fifth step is a highly, highly spiritually charged step. It goes into antiquity. We can read about it in all religious writings and many philosophical writings, and in the metaphysical writings of the Eastern religions. It's everywhere, because for all time, those who thought about it or those who have been involved in spiritual pursuits have understood the enormous power and necessity of being honest with another person. It isn't enough for us to say, oh, well, God knows all about me. And yeah, I've admitted this stuff to myself. That's enough. I don't need to, why would I need to tell somebody else about it? We do need to do that. If we don't do the fifth step, we will drink again. That's a pretty good reason, isn't it? The fifth step is done this way. Now, this is not in the Big Book, and this is, I'm going to pass this along to you just as a practical lesson. We have a fourth step, and it tells us that in the Big Book, and therefore we're going to follow the fourth step. We're not going to read it, but we use it as a guide. We want to do that so that we do not miss anything. And we just start right out with the resentment list and go on through the list of our own wrongs and our fears and our sex inventory. And all along the way, what we're doing is we're examining what has happened as we've gone through life. We're examining our failures, examining our pains, the pains we've caused others. We're looking to see how our defects of character were constantly getting in the way, constantly causing us to act and react in ways which were destructive and damaging not only to ourselves but to others. We really begin to see how it is that our drinking, our drunkenness, our disease was perpetuated because of these defects. We see our powerlessness over them. We see that we can't get rid of them ourselves. And somewhere along the line, as we go through this process, we come to understand and admit and decide that we cannot live with these defects anymore. We want to be free of them, and we've already decided that God can restore us to sanity, and we make a decision to let God have these defects. We don't want to hold on to any part of it. And a fifth step properly done will always result in that. Top of page 76. If we can answer to our satisfaction, that is, yes indeed, I've done all of this, I left no stone unturned, I'm ready. We then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Now then, are we now ready to let God remove from us all? Oh, that's a three-letter word. What don't we understand about the word all? We'd like to think that there's a lot of weasel room here. You know, we can play around with this for a while. Don't really have to be ready to have God take all this stuff. There might be some stuff there we still want to hang on to. That's crazy. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He take them all, every one? What don't we understand about every one? Top of page 76. If we can answer to our satisfaction, that is, yes indeed, I've done all of this, I left no stone unturned, I'm ready. We then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Now then, are we now ready to let God remove from us all? Oh, that's a three-letter word. What don't we understand about the word all? We'd like to think that there's a lot of weasel room here. You know, we can play around with this for a while. Don't really have to be ready to have God take all this stuff. There might be some stuff there we still want to hang on to. That's crazy. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He take them all, every one? What don't we understand about every one? Now there was another whole set of things which was blocking us from God. It wasn't just our defects of character and our insanities, but it was also all this guilt we were carrying around. And that's why we have to, in our fourth step, we have to find out whom we've harmed and become willing right then to set matters straight if we can. In our fifth step, we're going to admit what we have done. And in the sixth and seventh step, we're seeking relief from our defects. In the eighth and ninth steps, we're seeking relief from our guilts. Because keep in mind that our guilts block us from God just as surely as do our defects and our insanities. And so the eighth step turns out to be, by the time we get there, it's mostly already done, because we did it when we took our fourth step.